Well, turning now to college campuses on edge after several foreign national students were detained by immigration and customs enforcement agents over the last 2 weeks, including individuals from Columbia University, Tufts, and the University of Alabama. For more on that, as well as how President Trump is signing other powerful executive orders to implement his goals for a second term, let's bring in award-winning journalist and Morehouse adjunct professor of journalism, Nicole Carr. Nicole, thank you so much for being with us. You work on a college campus. Tell us about the discussions that are being had between students and faculty following the recent ICE detainments of students who were involved in pro-Palestinian protests.
Well, listen, I'll tell you, Janai, these conversations started way before anyone was detained, right? I have my student journalists covering federal government impact on HBCUs, and one of the first stories that comes out of the classroom that was recently published in Capital B is about, Morehouse's plan to confront ICE agents should they show up on campus. For anyone, faculty, staff, students, we are international hubs, just like any other college campus. And there's so much uncertainty everywhere. But we know on our campuses, we have a history not only of activism, but of the federal government surveilling activities. When we think about the history of SNCC, when we think about one of the greatest legal minds of the 20th century, Pauli Murray, before there's Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin, Pauli Murray is leading a sit-in movement as a law student at Howard University. And so our students, our faculty, our staff, the very existence of our universities have always been at the intersection of activism, social justice, and civil rights. And so it's been this ongoing conversation that I now just want my student journalists to delve into as we are these international hubs, constantly having these conversations.
And Nicole, what is it like as you're teaching the next generation of journalists in real time as we see them tackling this news that is so close to home? And what lessons are you giving them as they're covering the second Trump administration?
Yeah, absolutely. Janai, we know how much the business has changed since even we stepped foot in it, right? Yeah. And in the last 15 to 20 years, this idea of covering an administration that is, let's be completely honest, living in an alternate reality, moving toward erasure of the truth, of reality, of history. I'm teaching them to cover the moment in the spirit of the historic Black press. And I say that because we don't have a complete history of America without the presence of the historic Black press. I always say if you were an alien and you dropped down on Earth, you dropped down in America, pick a year, 1947, and you look at A1 of the Black press and you look at A1 of mainstream press, which front page gets you closer to the truth of what is happening in America? It is no doubt the historic Black press that serves as that guide, as that guiding light. And so this is what I'm teaching them, that this idea of objectivity, it only works when we're standing in facts. And once we have the facts, it is not our duty to be stenographers for what an administration says and what they're doing next. Let the public know that, but lead with the truth. These aren't hard concepts. But I think we've struggled with this over the past decade. And I've covered the Trump administration. I've covered the pandemic, our racial reckoning, the big lie that took root here in Georgia with the elections. I've covered school boards and extremism and race and democracy. We need to lean into history as our guide, and we absolutely need to be unapologetic in truth. And that starts with our framing of story.
And I know with your writing on Fortify, you are making sure to bring that historical context to all that you are covering today. Nicole, this week, President Trump signed an executive order entitled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, to your point, and directing the removal of, quote, improper, divisive, and anti-American ideology, end quote, from the Smithsonian museums. How do you interpret what he's trying to accomplish here?
It's what I saw in January, the last time that I visited the African American Museum of History and Culture there in D.C. I was there for the dedication, ironically, of the Ida B. Wells Mint coin, right? And we're talking about the way that she covered this nation, our nation's first investigative journalist, data investigative journalist. and her coverage of lynchings in America. And there were murmurs in the museum in January that, whew, I'm glad we got this thing done, meaning Ida B. Wells' face on this mint coin before this administration took hold. I take this as erasure. Look, I spent time living in Greensboro, North Carolina, near Battleground Avenue, where I would stroll my baby through the park that got federal funds to maintain that park through reenactments of the Confederacy, right? I'm not hearing anything from this administration about shutting down Confederate reenactments. I'm not hearing anything. And why should we? It should be a moment for us to learn about what took place on the very grounds in which we live and what lessons we can learn from that. What is this idea, this whole talk about ideology, when we just need to be rooted in the truth? But if we can erase those things, if we cannot talk about those things, then we can normalize what's happening here in this very moment. And we can lack the context that we need to process that, to report on, to honestly resist. I know journalists do not like to say, hey, we're part of a resistance. Yeah, truth-telling is resistance. It actually is. And so our most important function in this time plays into the very thing that is under attack, and that is to create the most accurate first draft of history possible, not only for those who are here today, but for those who come behind us, so they can understand what was really happening in this time. So it's unfortunate, but we are the archive. We are the narrators. We need to do this work and let it land wherever it's going to land and figure out how to fortify, for lack of a better word, fortify and figure out where to do this storytelling, how to do it, and how to continue.
And Nicole, before I let you go, we're almost out of time, but real quick, you have a long history of reporting on education. We can't let you go without asking your take on the Trump administration's attempt to dismantle the Department of Education and the effect that this could have on students across the country.
Sure. I mean, I remember beginning to cover the anti-DEI movement in 2021 in the wake of the anti-critical race theory movement. What is happening today made its way through our local school boards for years. It was what I wrote in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution last month, the test ground for the fall of democracy. So all of these measures that we're seeing at the federal government level, they've already been tested in our backyards with our children and their schooling. So this isn't a surprise. And we know that Project 2025 was wide open as a playbook for us to see for a couple of years. I just think a lot of people never thought we could get to this point. So the administration and its allies and the folks who were not a part of the administration while Project 2025 was being crafted, who are now leading the charge in all of these things, have been very clear about where this is headed. And now we have to figure out what that means in terms of resegregating America, erasing proper curricula from our schools, financing student meals, education. I mean, I think in the past 30 days or 50 days or since the administration has taken hold, we really all understand just how tied to the federal government we are in our everyday lives, and that includes education. So you take this thing back to the states, how do we fund this?
Yeah.
How where do we go from here? And I know we could talk for a long time. We're running out.
But we appreciate you so much for being here. There's so much to dive into. And Nicole Carr, we appreciate the work that you are doing and for being here today to talk to us about it. Thank you so much, Nicole. And still coming up here on ABC News Live Weekend, brain changes during pregnancy. A new study finding postpartum is associated